The little girl realized that her mother didn't like her at all. While her classmates had sumptuous lunches, her mother only packed 2 shriveled plums in her lunchbox. She rummaged through the lunchbox for a long time and finally found that apart from the plums, there was only rice, so she began to doubt whether her mother really loved her. After school, Kana asked her brother and sister what was in their lunchboxes. They said they had fried eggs and shrimp tempura. Hearing this, Kana felt very sad because shrimp tempura was her favorite dish. When her mother came home from work, Kana asked why there were no dishes in her lunch. She thought her mother might have forgotten, but her mother admitted that it was intentional. Her mother said, "You always pick at your food and don't finish it, so I didn't put any dishes in your lunch. When you learn to appreciate food, I'll start putting delicious dishes in your lunchbox again." Hearing her mother's response, Kana felt very disappointed. She couldn't understand why her mother cared only about her brother and sister but treated her differently. Kana sat in the yard for a long time. This 7-year-old girl came to a conclusion.
やっぱりお母さんはカナが嫌いなんよ。
While she was feeling sad alone, her grandmother next door brought out 2 popsicles. Kana ate a popsicle while asking her grandmother if she was an annoying child. Her grandmother gently comforted her. "Who would dislike a girl as lovely as you?" Her grandmother's words made her very happy, and her bad mood was instantly dispelled. At that time, she didn't know that in the coming years, her grandmother would be like a warm candle, illuminating every moment of her life. Kana had never seen her father since she was born, and her mother raised 4 children alone. To support her 4 children, her mother worked as a dishwasher in a hotel. Every day before work, her mother had to wake up the 4 siblings with an iron pot and then prepare their lunches. Kana's grandparents lived next door, and every day when she went to school, she would meet her grandfather on his way to work. Her grandfather was very kind to his granddaughters and would always walk them to school. In Kana's memory, her grandmother always dressed elegantly and treated others gently. So compared to her rough-around-the-edges mother, Kana preferred to stay with her graceful grandmother. One evening, Kana was playing in the living room with a cane, but her older sister and brother found her annoying. She went to her 3rd sister, who was doing homework, and was also told to be quiet. Her siblings all resented her. Kana felt wronged and went to her mother to complain, but her mother also blamed her for disturbing her siblings. Kana felt very aggrieved. She just wanted someone to play with her. Why did everyone in the family think she was at fault? She ran to her grandmother's house next door, crying that her mother and siblings all hated her. Her grandmother gently comforted her, and her grandfather picked her up, praising her as the most lovable girl. It seemed that only at her grandparents' house did Kana feel valued. Kana loved playing chess with her grandfather, while her grandmother would sit beside them knitting clothes. Her grandfather always had a kind smile on his face. However, this was the last time Kana would see her grandfather. After her grandfather passed away, her grandmother was in low spirits for a long time. She didn't want to leave the house where she had lived with her husband for decades, and her sadness was evident to Kana's family. To keep her grandmother from feeling lonely, her 3rd sister suggested, "Why don't you move next door to keep grandma company?" Her mother agreed, knowing that Kana had the best relationship with her grandmother. Although Kana didn't resist moving in with her grandmother, she still felt a bit down. She suddenly felt as if her mother and sister were driving her out of the house. After that, Kana moved next door and began living with her grandmother. She found that her grandmother was different from her mother. In the morning, if she stayed in bed, her grandmother would gently wake her up with a smile. Every day before school, her grandmother would prepare a delicious breakfast for her. After breakfast, Kana would run back home to show off the delicious food her grandmother made. But her siblings were still busy with their own things as usual and didn't bother to pay attention to her. She went to the kitchen to show off to her mother, who was cooking, but her mother also responded perfunctorily. Being ignored repeatedly made Kana feel even more disappointed. She just wanted to get her mother's and siblings' attention. Why did they never care about her feelings? Over time, Kana gradually got used to living with her grandmother. Her grandmother would play chess with her like her grandfather did, and Kana often learned to cook with her grandmother after school. She became more and more sensible, helping her grandmother with household chores every day, but she didn't like cleaning the toilet. However, her grandmother insisted that she try to learn to clean it. After cleaning the toilet, her grandmother told her a story about a toilet goddess who was the most beautiful of all deities. If you kept the toilet clean, the toilet goddess would grant your wishes. Because if a person's toilet was clean, it showed that they were serious about life. Kana remembered her grandmother's teachings and became particularly diligent about cleaning the toilet. She not only cleaned the toilet at home but also actively cleaned the school toilets. Although living with her grandmother was happy and fulfilling, Kana sometimes had quarrels with her. One day, she ran home from school and found out that her grandmother had forgotten to record a TV show for her. It turned out that her grandmother had gone to the theater to watch a newly released comedy that morning and promised to record it for Kana. Kana's all-day anticipation was shattered, and she got angry at her grandmother.
おばあちゃんの大嫌いや。
Kana, 堪忍して。
She ran out of her grandmother's house with anger and walked alone to the hotel where her mom worked. She told her mom she was leaving her grandmother's house and was going to wander off on her own. But her mother didn't take her words seriously and said, "If you leave, I won't come looking for you." Young Kana doesn't yet understand the hardships of being an adult. At that moment, she felt that no one in the world cared about her. Kana wandered near her grandmother's house until dusk, but eventually, she returned to her grandmother's doorstep. She wanted to go inside and make up with her grandmother, but remembering what she had said before leaving, she felt too ashamed to go in. Just as she was about to go back home, she saw her grandmother standing at the door.
カナ、
おばあちゃん。
よかった。はよ入り。今夜はカナの好きなすき焼きやで。
Whenever a child gets angry at an elder, it seems the elder is always the first to bow and compromise. After her grandmother's apology and comfort, the small conflict between Kana and her grandmother finally came to an end. One day, the teacher assigned an essay about fathers, but Kana couldn't write a single word. When she got home, she asked her mother about her father. Her mother said, "Your dad is a philandering liar. When we were dating, your father claimed to be 1.7 meters tall, but after we got married, I found out he was only 1.6 meters. During our dating period, your father put 10-centimeter insoles in his shoes. He earned 100,000 yen a month but only gave me 10,000 after getting paid. He spent the remaining 90,000 yen going out with 5 other women. I couldn't live with him, so after you were born, I divorced him." Kana then asked her older sister, who said their father was a handsome man when he was young. She took out an old photo, a picture of their father, mother, and older sister. Looking at the handsome man in the photo, Kana had the idea of meeting her father. The next day, she took the address her sister provided and went alone to find her father. She looked forward to meeting her handsome father and imagined a beautiful first meeting with him. But as soon as she arrived at her destination, a strange man started staring at her.
おっさん、私を誘拐しようとして無駄やで。うちは貧乏やし、おかんは私が嫌いやから、私のためにお金なんか払わんし。
かなか
おっちゃん誰？
お父さんや。
お父さん？イケメンちゃうやん。
It turned out that her mother had called her father in advance, asking him to pick Kana up from the station. Her father took her to a seaside restaurant, and they had a meal together. When his friends asked who the little girl was, her father replied that she was a relative's child. Kana felt her heart skip a beat. She couldn't understand why her father didn't want to acknowledge their relationship. She lost her appetite and said she wanted to go home. As she left, her father chased after the car yelling for her to come back and play next time. But Kana didn't respond from inside the car. Her mood was at rock bottom, but she couldn't cry. It wasn't until she saw her grandmother waiting to pick her up at the station that Kana finally broke down in uncontrollable sobs.
カナ、
おばあちゃん。
初めての冒険旅行はどうやった？よう頑張ったな。お腹空いとるやろ？いつものとこ行くか？
To comfort the heartbroken Kana, her grandmother took her to eat a bowl of duck soup noodles. Eating the delicious noodles, Kana's mood slowly improved. But thinking about her father's indifference and her mother's neglect, Kana told her grandmother, "I really am an unwanted child." Her grandmother then shared a story about Kana's mother during childbirth. When Kana's mother was giving birth, she had a difficult labor. The doctor suggested giving up the baby to save the mother, but her mother didn't listen to the doctor and insisted on giving birth to Kana. So in your mother's heart, you are more precious than her own life. Hearing her grandmother's story, Kana's impression of her mother improved significantly. Time passed day by day, and Kana lived happily under her grandmother's care. Her grandmother often played a piece of music before bedtime, planting the seed of a musical dream in Kana's heart. Whenever Kana's throat was hoarse, her grandmother would make her pear soup. Whenever Kana was sad, her grandmother would tell her fairy tales to cheer her up. Her grandmother accompanied her through a wonderful childhood. 11 years have passed and Kana is now 18 years old. To save enough money for college, she started working part-time while attending school. Kana often worked late into the night. Due to their different schedules, she spent less time with her grandmother. By the time she got home from work, it was already late at night, and her grandmother had long since gone to bed. Every morning, she rushed to school, and her conversations with her grandmother were reduced to brief exchanges. Kana had fallen in love with music and dreamed of becoming a singer. Kana's boyfriend was an athlete whose dream was to achieve a good ranking in the national competition. Although both had their own dreams, their relationship inevitably took up a lot of time. Aside from classes and work, she spent almost all her time with her boyfriend. Perhaps influenced by their relationship, her boyfriend's training performance began to decline, and Kana couldn't focus on creating her music. She suggested to her boyfriend that they take a break from each other to focus on their own goals. However, her boyfriend refused, saying he was willing to give up his dreams for Kana. It seemed that in his eyes, Kana was more important than his own future. But her boyfriend's intense love did not make Kana happy. After school, Kana didn't feel like working. Rarely, she went home in the evening. She told her grandmother about her boyfriend and asked if she should give up her musical dreams for him. Her grandmother told her that the answer was obviously no. Before caring for others, you should care for yourself. You shouldn't give up your dreams for someone else. That night, Kana thought long and hard. Finally, the next day, she broke up with her boyfriend.
大輔は歌を歌わ私でも好きやって言ってくれたけど私このまま曲作らんかったら自分のことが嫌いになりそうやね
Kana and her boyfriend made a promise. When we both achieve our dreams, it won't be too late to meet again. Afterward, Kana kissed her boyfriend goodbye and turned to walk toward her own future. After the breakup, Kana finally had her own time and could focus on creating her music. 3 years later, Kana graduated from music school. She started singing on the streets of her hometown, performing her own compositions. At first, no one paid attention to Kana, but her beautiful voice seemed to have a magical quality that made people stop and listen. Gradually, her audience grew. A music hall owner noticed Kana, and she became a resident singer at the music hall. Whenever she had a performance, her grandmother would bring the whole family to cheer her on. As Kana's fame grew in her hometown, she began to have thoughts of venturing to Tokyo. Tokyo is the center of the entertainment industry, and Kana wanted to become a professional singer there. She shared this idea with her family, but her mother disagreed. Her mother thought it would be difficult for Kana to become a professional singer, and the cost of living in Tokyo was too high. Moreover, staying in their hometown was fine. At least she wouldn't have to worry about food if she fell on hard times.
カナはそれで後悔せえへんのかお母さんやりたいことやり残した後悔は辛いもんやでやりたいことやってあかんかっても納得できるから夢やから大事なんやないか夢は見るもんやない叶えるもんや
With her grandmother's support, her mother relented. Kana gathered her courage and decided to go to Tokyo. On the day of her departure, her grandmother prepared a lot of pear soup for Kana and encouraged her to create unique songs. This was Kana's first time leaving her hometown and her first step toward seeing a broader world. But at that moment, Kana didn't know that after this farewell, it would be hard for her to see her grandmother again. 6 months later, Kana was living alone in a small rented room in Tokyo. She had not achieved fame, nor had she realized her dream of becoming a professional singer. Kana continued to sing on the streets, but the busy people of Tokyo didn't stop to listen. She had to work part-time as a waitress in a restaurant, using her meager income to keep her dream alive. She accidentally broke a plate in the kitchen, and the chef yelled at her. Every night, she returned to her rented room, filled with an overwhelming sense of defeat. When Kana was feeling down and dejected, she saw the toilet goddess pillow her grandmother had given her. She remembered the story her grandmother had told her as a child about the toilet goddess. As long as you kept the toilet clean, no matter how bad life was, things would turn around. Kana began cleaning the toilet, using the process to release all her negative emotions. At that moment, she believed her grandmother's words. As long as she stayed strong and optimistic, the toilet goddess would watch over her. Afterward, she returned to the streets to sing. Even if no one stopped, she sang with all her heart. During this time, she discovered a poster for a young singer competition. Kana planned to participate, but when she told her family about it, she learned that her grandmother was seriously ill and hospitalized. Kana hurriedly returned to her hometown from Tokyo. Her grandmother was still elegant but had lost some weight compared to 6 months ago. She asked about her grandmother's health, but her grandmother suddenly scolded her coldly.
何しに帰ってきたんやはよ東京に帰りカナにしか歌えへんあんたらしい歌は
私はおばあちゃんが心配で
あんたが今おるべきとこはどこや
Her grandmother harshly drove her out of the hospital, and that was the last time Kana saw her grandmother's face. Kana didn't know that after she left, her grandmother cried alone in a hospital room for a long time. Her grandmother knew Kana was preparing for the singer competition and didn't want to be a burden on Kana's pursuit of her dreams, so she used a cold attitude to distance herself from Kana, allowing her to focus on her future. After returning to Tokyo, Kana continued to work at the restaurant, sing on the streets, and write and compose songs in her small room. Finally, she brought her original song to the stage of the Young Singer competition, but just after the competition ended, she received news that her grandmother was critically ill. She rushed back to her hometown hospital, but her grandmother could no longer open her eyes.
なんでこんなんなるまで知らせてくれんかったん？
お母さんが知らせるなんて、カナの人生で一番大事な勝負時やから、いらん心配させたないって。
Shortly after, Kana's family held a funeral for her grandmother. During the days of the funeral, Kana didn't feel very sad. It wasn't until after the funeral, when she walked into her grandmother's house and saw the empty room, that she finally realized her grandmother was gone from this world forever. Kana wandered aimlessly in her grandmother's house, which no longer held her grandmother's graceful presence. Left on the table was some pear soup that grandma made before she died, just hasn't gotten around to sending it to Kana. Her mind was flooded with many memories, from her childhood to the time before she left home, as if they had just happened yesterday. Scenes from her childhood flashed before her eyes. At that moment, she suddenly realized that from now on, she no longer had her grandmother. Later, she achieved her dream and became a nationally renowned singer, but her late grandmother could no longer witness her success. And the unique song Kana had written especially for her grandmother would never have the chance to hear it.